Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome to the BlueGreen Alliance webinar, Forging Ahead, Investing in Domestic Clean Aluminum in Partnership with the Sustainable Aluminum Network. I am Jasmine Mossbarger, Communications Manager at the BlueGreen Alliance, alongside my colleagues, BGA Deputy Communications Director Abby Harvey and Annie Sarter, Aluminum Campaign Director at Industrious Labs. Together, we will facilitate this discussion. Annie will also share a bit more about the Sustainable Aluminum Network in a minute. Today, you will hear from policy experts, an aluminum worker, and the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations with the Department of Energy on how we can revitalize the domestic aluminum industry with investments in the Inflation Reduction Act. Our list of panelists include Jason Walsh, Executive Director at the BlueGreen Alliance; Joe Quinn, Vice President of Strategic Industrial Materials at Securing America's Future Energy; Katrina Rourke, Senior Vice President of Policy and Research at the Climate Leadership Council; Ashley Boucher, Ultrasonic Lead at Kaiser Aluminum Trentwood, as well as the Women of Steel Committee Co-Chair at United Steelworkers Local 338. And then Tara Gedelvis, Industrial Demonstrations Program Project Manager at the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. Each of our panelists will speak for approximately 10 minutes, followed by a Q&A session. Questions can be submitted using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will be collecting questions throughout the program, so feel free to submit them as you think of them. Before our panelists speak, I will turn it over to Annie to talk about the Sustainable Aluminum Network.
Hi, good morning. Thanks, Jasmine. I'm Annie Sarter. I'm the Aluminum Campaign Director at Industrious Labs. In my role, I convene and facilitate coordination among organizations that make up the Sustainable Aluminum Network. The Sustainable Aluminum Network unites national security experts, labor advocates, and leading environmental groups to work together to modernize and grow the U.S. primary aluminum industry by investing in clean energy, workers, and communities. SAN advocates and proposes for solutions for a robust, sustainable U.S. aluminum supply chain by 2030 that will slash emissions while creating family-sustaining jobs in communities that have been hit hard by the aluminum industry's decline in recent decades. By repowering and remodernizing aluminum manufacturing, we can reshore U.S. companies, revive local communities, and restore thousands of family-sustaining jobs to meet the global demand for sustainable aluminum. So thanks for coming, and I'll hand it off to Jason Walsh at BlueGreen Alliance.
Thanks, Annie. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. My name is Jason Walsh. I'm the Executive Director of the BlueGreen Alliance. We are a national coalition that unites labor unions and environmental organizations. What brings and keeps BGA's partners together is a bedrock belief that we should not have to choose between good jobs and a clean environment, that we can and must have both, which is why we support the revitalization of a strong, clean, American aluminum industry. Aluminum is one of the most important metals to modern life, most used metal in the world, an essential, highly durable, and lightweight material that's in everything from our bridges and high-rise buildings to our smartphones and kitchen appliances. Aluminum is also critical for our rapidly growing clean energy economy. It's a material we'll need more of, much more, for electric vehicles, solar PV modules, transmission lines, and more. To cite just one example, analysis by researchers at Princeton and Dartmouth, released earlier this year, estimates that new solar and wind power generation projects catalyzed by the Inflation Reduction Act will increase demand for aluminum by 2035 to 150% of what our domestic aluminum industry currently produces economy-wide. But the fact is that in the US, our growing need for aluminum already far surpasses the dwindling output from our domestic primary production. As a result, much of the aluminum we use comes from abroad, including from countries where aluminum production is much more polluting and where labor standards are much weaker. It was not always this way. In fact, until the turn of this century, the US was the world's leading aluminum producer. The industry had long provided the country with a stable supply of aluminum and good jobs, but decades of decline have left our primary aluminum industry in tatters. Nearly 20 smelters have closed, and domestic production has dropped by over 80% since the 1980s. As the industry languished, tens of thousands of aluminum workers have lost their jobs. These losses have been particularly painful since aluminum manufacturing jobs typically offer better wages, benefits, and access to unions and other jobs in the economy, especially for workers without a college degree. As dislocated aluminum workers lost their high-wage jobs, their communities have also had to grapple with the economic fallout of shuttered smelters. Job losses have not been the only consequence of the U.S. aluminum industry's decline. Its deterioration has also led to increased climate pollution. As companies closed U.S. smelters and domestic output diminished, the world's aluminum started to come from countries with lower environmental standards and higher emissions. China and India in particular began to ramp up production. Both countries produce aluminum with substantially higher emissions than the U.S. China's aluminum production is about 65% more emissions intensive than ours, and India's aluminum is made with double the emissions of U.S. aluminum. As a result of these trends, about 2/3 of the world's aluminum is now made in countries with more emissions intensive production than in the U.S. These trends also threaten national security. Only one of the 6 remaining domestic smelters produces the high purity aluminum needed by the U.S. Armed Forces, and it was idled last year. This status quo can't continue, and it doesn't have to. In June, BGA released Aluminum Revitalize, Strengthening the Backbone of Our Clean Economy, a comprehensive report on how to reverse the recent decline of the U.S. aluminum industry and meet the rising aluminum demand for clean energy while creating good-paying jobs, strengthening national security, and reducing industrial emissions. In our report, we argue that federal policymakers should utilize 3 important tools to restore our domestic industry and secure the nuts and bolts we need to grow clean energy across our country. The first is procurement. Buy American domestic content rules can grow the domestic market for clean U.S. aluminum. Large purchasers of aluminum should apply these principles to their procurement practices, and U.S. aluminum producers can harness the domestic content tax bonuses in the Inflation Reduction Act that incentivize developers and manufacturers of solar, wind, and other clean energy technologies to purchase US-made aluminum. The second tool is investment, use of federal financing programs and national defense policies. For example, the Inflation Reduction Act includes more than $50 billion, I will say that again, more than $50 billion for new grants, loans, and tax credits to support clean manufacturing. Some of this financing can help our remaining domestic aluminum smelters become cleaner and more globally competitive, or it could be used to open new state-of-the-art aluminum smelters. In addition to IRA investments, policymakers can deploy instruments like the Defense Production Act to support growth in clean aluminum manufacturing, in particular by offering an affordable supply of clean electricity. The third tool is trade. Smart trade policy can support the growth of clean U.S. aluminum manufacturing by reversing outsourcing to emissions-intensive countries and shifting U.S. demand toward cleaner aluminum production. For example, a well-designed border fee on highly climate polluting imports, frequently called a carbon border adjustment mechanism, can serve each of these ends while also supporting good aluminum manufacturing jobs here at home and helping to curb aluminum emissions beyond our borders. Over the course of this webinar, we will dive into each of these tools more thoroughly and learn about their real-world impact as we outline how we can secure and sustain a strong, clean American aluminum industry. I will now turn it over to Ashley Boucher to talk about her work at Kaiser Trentwood and her experience as a union member so that we can ground this conversation in the lived experience of working people. Talk further and get a little bit abstract and wonky. So Ashley, over to you.
All right, thank you. My name is Ashley Boucher, and I am the lead ultrasonic inspection operator for Kaiser Aluminum in Spokane, Washington. And I'm also the co-chair for our Women of Steel in Local 338 of the United Steelworkers. So at Kaiser, we make flat rolled products for aerospace and military applications. And as part of the ultrasonic inspection department, we are the last step of the process before the metal heads out the door. We use ultrasound to inspect the metal for inclusions. My department is held to a very high standard. We go through a pretty lengthy training process, which includes a week-long class and a set number of hours on the floor and applying our techniques. That's just to reach our first certification level. So beyond that, we have to go through extra training and more hands-on, and then we can progress to the next level. So Kaiser has provided me with all of that training that I've needed for the job. I'm just school graduate, some minimal courses, but I have been able to receive this training and certification on site to perform my job and produce a best-in-class clean product. As the co-chair of the Women of Steel, my position is to lead hardworking women in our plant by connecting with the community, uniting our members in our community, and help facilitate any issues that women may have in a male-dominated workplace. We have volunteered at women's shelters, donated items to them and to schools nearby. We have also raised funds for our members going through tragedies and affected by the recent wildfires in our area. So I have worked at Kaiser and been a steel worker for almost 16 years. We are one of the highest paying jobs in Spokane, thanks to our union. Our medical benefits are 100% paid for myself and my family. I'm a married mom of 3 kids. And because of my wages and benefits, I've been able to raise my kids and provide for our family. My husband was able to start his own business and thrive in that business. The American dream is to work hard, but to also have that family balance. We like to spend our time in the outdoors and boating and camping and enjoying our beautiful Washington state. I know because of our union and company, at the end of a hard day's work, I can safely come home to my family, and that's what it's all about. I come from a long line of industry workers. My great-grandmother, she was a welder during World War II, and she welded on huge ships over in Bremerton. And my husband's grandmother was one of the original riveters. So there's history there. I feel really proud to help carry that on. And they didn't have all of the safety and environmental protocols that we have in place today. I'm really thankful that these people went through these different times and they fought for safer workplaces and livable wages, which my union helps secure for me. I'm living that American dream every day, and I'm working hard to produce a clean, sustainable product safely and going home to my family to do the things that I love. It's really what life is about. So I'm just proud to be a steel worker, Women of Steel, and I'm proud to work for Kaiser Aluminum. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Joe Quinn as the next speaker.
Thank you, Ashley. Hello, everyone. I'm Joe Quinn, Vice President of Strategic Industrial Materials at SAFE. SAFE is a nonpartisan organization committed to transportation and energy policy solutions that advance the economic and national security of the United States, its partners, and its allies. SAFE started nearly 20 years ago with the goal of ending U.S. dependence on foreign oil for economic and national security reasons. But just as the U.S. was relying on foreign sources for energy, we are now at the risk of relying on foreign sources for aluminum. We believe there is a tremendous opportunity to reshore and ally shore minerals and materials production, so the United States and its allies are not dependent on nations who do not share our interests. As you've heard, aluminum continues to play an ever-growing role in our day-to-day lives, and we do not want to mire ourselves in the same strategic vulnerabilities with an over-reliance on the strategic material from one place. We can go to the next slide. From the Ford F-150 Lightning to the F-35 fighter jet, industrial materials already power and form the basis of our most advanced technologies and almost every facet of our everyday lives. As you can see on the screen, aluminum products are essential to nearly every segment of the economy. In the coming decades, where aluminum comes from and how aluminum is produced will have a profound consequence on America's national security and economic competitiveness. We jump to the next slide. And there is unprecedented influx of government funding to spur domestic manufacturing, especially for the minerals and materials needed for the green energy transition, picking up on something Jason was talking about earlier. This chart shows aluminum is second only to copper in the needs for energy technology. Aluminum plays a vital role in making solar panels, the electric grid, EVs, and battery storage. It is important to note that these same materials, especially aluminum, are critical for defense applications as well. Notable military applications include armor plates for vehicles, aircraft structure parts and components, naval vessels, space and missile components, and propellants. Being dependent on unreliable and hostile actors elevates the strategic imperative of avoiding new dependencies for aluminum needed to power the green transition. This opportunity and challenge arguably constitutes a historic inflection point, being shaped by several converging trends and events. We jump to the next slide. In partnership with the Sustainable Aluminum Network, we are looking at the issues and opportunities for domestic primary aluminum production as a three-part solution. Jason and Ashley talked about the vital role of American workers. You'll soon hear from Katrina about the impact of trade policy, and it's great to have Tara from DOE talk about government support. To home in on the national security part of the solution, let me drill down a little bit on the production and capability numbers. As Jason mentioned, there are only 6 primary aluminum smelters in the US, with 5 that are operational. These 5 smelters have a combined capacity of 1.2 million metric tons. However, they are currently operating at about 60% capacity, meaning the US production is around 750,000 metric tons. Now let's compare that to demand. Industry analysts say there is demand for 5 million metric tons of primary aluminum in the US. On our best day, which we are far from, the US can produce 20% of what it needs. Now, thankfully, US imports 2 million metric tons from Canada. More than half of what we need is produced in North America. About 30% of imports are coming from Europe, Brazil, and Australia. At the end of last year, the US was getting less than about 20% of primary aluminum from Russia and the UAE. Now, that was before the sanctions. The challenge we see is demand is expected to grow by the end of the decade. So currently, we might make up to 1 million metric tons in the US. We get 2 million from Canada, so 3/5 is from North America. But that 5 million metric ton will soon get to 6 million metric tons. As demand continues to grow, production will either plateau or decline. If you think of where we're getting metals from our allies, Canada, Norway, Iceland, Australia, again, they're either at capacity or will soon be at capacity. The gap between US and ally production versus hostile actors will continue to grow and as demand increases, but allied production plateaus or declines. This is where we see the threat to national and economic security. If you jump to the next slide, we released earlier this year a series of reports looking at the challenges to and offering solutions for the viability of the U.S. primary aluminum industry. We believe secure and resilient primary production in the U.S. and with allies is national security priority. Flat to declining production in the West at a time of rising demand enables hostile actors to disrupt access to aluminum, a vital component to clean energy transition, the national economy, and to national defense. Our energy report examines the paradox of rising demand for aluminum's energy-saving benefits versus the decline of production in the U.S. due to its energy intensivity in the production phase. Of all the issues that we're talking about, I think it's important to note that this is fundamentally an energy challenge. We'll get to the solutions here at the Q&A portion, but as we look at all these issues, as complicated as this is, it really comes down to access to affordable energy. Our report examines the details of that. We found that without federal support for domestic primary, the U.S. is at risk of a much larger reliance on UAE, Russia, and China for critical infrastructures, military needs, and clean technologies. Our legislative report examines how federal incentives to produce more clean energy transition products do not address the main obstacle to production, the access to energy. We found that the IRA and other bills are increasing demand for aluminum products, but do not address the challenge for aluminum production, especially access to affordable energy. Our trade report looks at how previous administrations approached aluminum trade policy, examining what worked, what didn't, and how the current administration should move forward. We found the last 3 administrations worked to address aluminum's price problem related to Chinese aluminum overcapacity, while overlooking the problem of the cost problem of domestic electricity. Lastly, our global production report examines what the U.S. and allies can learn from aluminum manufacturing policies around the world to overcome the challenges to the industry's viability, including high energy price volatility and strategic market manipulation by China. We found that the U.S. policymakers should consider carbon pricing schemes, demand response solutions for utilities, and connecting energy input costs to the LME price. I could go on, but I think for the sake of the program, I think it makes sense to move on to the next speaker. Thank you for the invitation. Happy to address more of this in the Q&A. But for now, I'd like to hand things over to Katrina Rourke to talk about trade. Katrina?
Thanks, Joe. Thank you to the hosts, BlueGreen Alliance and the Sustainable Aluminum Network. It is a real pleasure to join you today. The third leg of the stool that Jason mentioned was trade. That's what I'll spend my time talking about. I'm the Senior Vice President for Policy and Research at the Climate Leadership Council. We're an organization that explores market-based solutions to address the climate challenge at the scale and speed required. I'm also the Executive Director of our Center for Climate and Trade. At this center, we work with esteemed co-chairs, policy advisors, and a terrific network of stakeholders to explore and advance policies that can leverage global trade towards greater international cooperation and climate ambition. A lot of this work right now is tracking the fast-moving conversation around carbon import fees, border carbon adjustments, a grab bag of vocabulary that reflects a policy set that would begin to charge imports based on their carbon intensity of production. This is what Jason was alluding to as a trade policy that the role we play with the Sustainable Aluminum Network is keeping our eye on this shifting landscape and ensuring that we can plug in how other countries are adopting these policies, how the U.S. is considering these policies, and turn that into a tool to help the goals of increasing domestic production of clean aluminum. At this center, we've done a lot of work exploring this intersection between climate ambition and trade tools. As Jason said at the top, the energy transition is going to require a whole lot more aluminum and other primary materials. Aluminum, steel, glass, minerals. These typically require extremely energy-intensive processes to manufacture. And one of the key findings that we've had at the center is that the way that these manufacturing processes function across companies, across countries, can vary widely in their climate impacts. That's a key finding that we're bringing to the conversation. Additional key findings. Making more things in the US is good for our economy and good for the climate. In the US, we manufacture goods on average with 44% fewer carbon emissions than the global economy. Aluminum is no exception. We manufacture aluminum with fewer carbon emissions than the largest producers of aluminum globally. Another key finding, partnering with climate ambitious economies is good policy. It helps us friendshore, it helps us cut emissions. If the US and our G7 partners all introduced carbon border adjustment mechanisms or import fees to align imports with domestic carbon intensity, we could cut global greenhouse gas emissions about 5% and get half the global consumer economy in on valuing products made with fewer carbon emissions. That's a huge leap forward. And then a fourth key finding is that there are a bevy of climate and trade approaches that fall under this carbon border adjustment mechanism basket that can reward low carbon manufacturers, and there are appropriate defenses for each at the World Trade Organization. That means that our existing trading system is not an impediment to the creative approaches that we're exploring today. To the issue of the day, which is US aluminum production. If you could go to the next slide, Jasmine, that'd be great. So we've heard that US primary aluminum production has cratered over the last 2 decades, falling about 75% by a long shot. The largest producer of primary aluminum is now China. That's about 57% of global production. They have more than half of global production in one country. Offshoring to more carbon-intensive economies absolutely has negative environmental consequences. A snapshot of why there are negative environmental consequences is here. The vast majority of emissions associated with aluminum manufacturing are Scope 2 or electricity-related emissions. This chart lays out the carbon intensity of electricity production in the top 10 global aluminum producers. Our competitors tend to be much, much more carbon intensive than the US, producing as much as 70% more emissions to create the electricity used to manufacture aluminum and other primary goods necessary for the energy transition. This trend toward foreign manufacturers dominating the primary aluminum landscape stems from a number of dynamics that my colleagues have alluded to, but lower energy prices and fewer environmental controls in those countries are a major contributor. And one of the mechanisms that countries are turning to now to sort of turn the tide on how we see these high intensity countries begin to dominate manufacturing in these primary product categories is this trade basket. So on to the next slide, please. In order to insulate domestic metals manufacturing and encourage a resurgence in domestic manufacturing, the Trump administration back in March of 2018 imposed Section 232 tariffs, finding that imports were causing a national security threat. That we could manufacture high quality primary aluminum in the United States is a national security imperative. That's the finding. Those Trump tariffs imposed a 10% tariff rate on aluminum imports and later a series of import quotas. The tariffs had an immediate effect. They boosted domestic aluminum production, and now the Biden administration is building on that approach by integrating climate considerations. That is the Global Arrangement for Sustainable Steel and Aluminum, US partners in the European Union to cut the emissions associated with internationally traded metals and address something called non-market excess capacity. That's a jargony term that refers to a major contributing factor for high emission, low cost aluminum manufacture, which is essentially state-owned enterprises supporting the build out of manufacturing capacity that the market does not demand. It leads to lower prices on the market, tougher competition for market-based producers, and inhibits the kinds of investments that we need to make to decarbonize domestic aluminum manufacturing and reclaim that manufacturing mantle. This global arrangement is not the only one of its kind. There are a number of global trade developments. In October, the European Union launched its carbon border adjustment mechanism, which right now has begun to collect data on the carbon intensity of imports into the EU in a small section of imports, aluminum among them. So now we're getting data on the carbon intensity of aluminum traded into the European Union. But other countries are following suit. In various stages of development, we see carbon border adjustment mechanisms on the Taiwan, Canada, South Korea, Japan, India, and Australia. This is a really powerful trend, and it shows us that trade is moving in the direction of advantaging cleaner manufacturers, disadvantaging dirty manufacturers. As we're sort of reflecting on this trend, this is exactly well-timed to leverage what we're talking about here, what the Sustainable Aluminum Network is working toward, which is building out a low-carbon manufacturing fleet in the US. But a little bit on why these trade developments are happening so quickly, and I'll spotlight the politics in the US. On the next slide, I'll show you two senior officials who don't have a ton in common, but are establishing the economic and industrial policies for President Biden and former President Trump. And on the next slide, if it comes up, I promise you I'm not fibbing. There we go. Okay. So Brian Deese, former NEC director for President Biden, values these carbon import fees, climate-related trade policies more broadly, as an element of industrial policy in order to reward domestic manufacturing of lower carbon goods. He sees what we see, which is this opportunity to stem the tide on offshoring and promote domestic manufacturers who make these products with a lower climate footprint. At the same time that Brian Deese is highlighting the value of these policies, we see President Trump's U.S. trade representative also highlighting the value of these policies for a different reason. Bob Lighthizer sees this as an opportunity to marginalize authoritarian high-carbon regimes like China, like Russia, and reorient the global trading system around market-based economies like the U.S. We see this trend propagating overseas. There's a terrific opportunity to leverage trade policy for domestic policy goals, geopolitical goals, and it all shakes out to rewarding those manufacturers that can produce the goods we need for the energy transition with fewer carbon emissions. So my major takeaways, trade policies can rebalance the trends that have moved aluminum production out of the US, and this push to ramp up clean primary aluminum production is really well timed to leverage these new trade approaches, reestablish the United States as the dominant aluminum supplier, and reward American manufacturers for developing the practices that are vital to a low carbon future. So I commend you on your timing. With that, let's transition to talking about the domestic facing policy landscape and my colleague Tara at the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. Thanks.
Hello, thank you for that. Hi, everyone, and thank you to the BlueGreen Alliance for inviting me to speak. I'm Tara Goodvillis. I'm a project manager and our program's sector lead for aluminum in the Industrial Decarbonizations Program at the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations in the DOE. I've really appreciated hearing all of these perspectives today. There's widespread recognition of the need to support industries, including aluminum. So I'm here to talk about how the DOE is shifting to meet this moment. As I said, sorry, next slide. Thank you. As I said, I work for the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, or OCED. OCED was established in December 2021, and it was first authorized and funded through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or as is commonly known, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. OCED's mission is to deliver clean energy technology demonstration projects at a commercial scale and in partnership with the private sector to accelerate deployment, market adoption, and equitable transition to a decarbonized energy system. The founding of OCED builds on DOE's expertise in clean energy research and development and expands DOE's scope to fill a critical gap on the path to net zero GHG emissions by 2050. Next slide, please. The Industrial Demonstrations Program, or IDP, is one of the many programs within OSED. The energy and carbon intensity of the industrial sector represents a unique and complex challenge to decarbonize the nation's economy. It contributes nearly 1/3 of the nation's primary energy-related carbon dioxide emissions and is incredibly diverse, with emissions resulting from both fuel needed for heat and power, as well as feedstock and processes. Next slide, please. As many of you may know, approximately $6 billion from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act was allocated to the Industrial Demonstrations Program to support transformative advanced industrial facilities. The funds are intended to solidify a first mover advantage in U.S. industry in low and net zero carbon manufacturing, to help substantiate the market for clean products through high impact replicable solutions, and to build broadly shared prosperity for American workers and communities. This program has the potential to unlock an entirely new suite of technology solutions through public-private partnerships where risk is shared between the industry and DOE. When the $6 billion in federal funds is combined with the applicant cost share, which is 50%, it represents a $12 plus billion total investment that will accelerate transformational decarbonization projects in our nation's energy-intensive industries and position American companies as leaders in the clean energy economy. Next slide, please. To give you a little idea of the timing of our program, in December of last year, IDP released our notice of intent, and we quickly followed that with the funding opportunity announcement, or FOA, in March of this year. Throughout the year, we've continued to act in urgency as applicants submitted concept papers in April and full applications in August. We are currently in the application evaluation and selection process, and unfortunately, I am legally restricted from speaking about the process. But as noted in our funding opportunity, we expect to announce selections in early 2024. Next slide. IDP represents an unprecedented opportunity to demonstrate first or early of a kind decarbonization solutions in energy intensive industrial subsectors such as aluminum. Our FOA focuses on 7 key energy intensive industries, as well as energy intensive industries writ large, and cross-cutting opportunities that address multiple facilities and sectors. This program offers a critical opportunity to solidify a first mover advantage for U.S. industry, bolstering its competitiveness globally for decades into the future. Next slide, please. As stated in our FOA, and in keeping with the goals laid out for us by Congress and the legislation, the priorities of this program are deep decarbonization to demonstrate significant reductions in carbon intensity, timeliness to address these emissions in the near term and spur followers to action sooner rather than later, market viability to support solutions that solidify a first mover advantage in the U.S. industry, and community benefits to build broadly shared prosperity for American workers and their communities. These 4 priorities shape the program and the projects that we are looking to support with funding. Next slide, please. One of the things I wanted to elaborate a little more on is the community benefits plan. This is a required part of all applications for Bill and IRA funded programs and is evaluated along with the other technical review criteria. Application of community benefits plan describing how the project will support meaningful community and labor engagement, invest in the American workforce, advance diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and contribute to the president's goal of 40% of overall benefits of certain federal investments flowing to disadvantaged communities, also known as the Justice 40 initiative. In addition to those 4 components, this particular legislation for our program specifically includes a priority for the greatest benefit for the greatest number of people within the area in which the facility is located. That's significant because it allows us to look at the health impacts of the projects on their communities. Next slide, please. While I'm not permitted from speaking about the applications we've received, I thought it might be interesting to talk a little bit about our concept paper phase. We were extremely pleased with the tremendous response from industry, showing that they were ready for this challenge. DOE reviewed 411 concepts and encouraged 130, and DOE envisions that 22 to 65 applications will ultimately be selected. $6 billion may sound like a lot of money, and it is, but as you can see, we were highly oversubscribed, receiving over $60 billion in funding requests. In aluminum alone, we received $2.6 billion in funding requests. We saw a lot of amazing projects, some of which we don't have funding or authorization for within our provision, but we hope that they will go forward. Our program is in close contact with other programs and offices across DOE, so I'd like to use my last bit of time to highlight some other programs within that have opportunities in this space. Next slide, please. The 48C tax credit program, which is administered by DOE's Office of Manufacturing and Energy Supply Chains, or MESC, may be suitable for deployment of high TRL technologies. This program is currently implementing their first round of funding and anticipates additional rounds. The Industrial Efficiency and Decarbonization Office, or IEDO, has a sister program that supports industrial decarbonization at lower TRLs, including pilots and smaller demonstrations. For additional commercialization efforts, applicants may wish to consider DOE's Technology Commercialization Fund, which has supported projects through voucher opportunities, prizes, work with national laboratories, and more. DOE's Loan Programs Office provides access to loans and loan guarantees as a bridge to bankability for innovative technologies. In addition, offices across the DOE are putting out their own funding opportunities, as you can see with FECM and MESC and any offices. I'd like to close by recognizing that Bill and Ira are a historic investment with a lot of opportunity, and they are a terrific beginning. We serve at the will of Congress, and the DOE is implementing what Congress has already dictated. Aluminum is one of our key areas of interest for this funding opportunity, but as I mentioned previously, we're also here to support other industries as well. It'll be up to Congress to decide if they want to appropriate additional funds for industrial decarbonization or for aluminum specifically. That said, it's helpful for us to understand the opportunity space, so please stay tuned, see what comes out of this and other programs, and reach out to us so we're aware of what's going on in the industry. And after our selections are announced, if it's of interest, we'd be happy to talk in greater detail about the projects that we will be supporting. With that, I'd like to pass it back to Jason Walsh for the Q&A.
Thanks, Tara. And I'm sure you've seen, I know some of you have seen instructions in the chat to submit questions into the Q&A. I'm going to take a look at what we've got so far. Yes, I think we can get you slides, folks. We will get everyone's confirmation that they're comfortable sharing slides and send those around. I see here a comment from Lauren. Fantastic panel, appreciate it. Where does reclamation of domestic aluminum, i.e. domestic recycling, fit into this conversation? Where can we access federal funding to increase domestic solid waste management? A two-part question. Anyone want to field it? Let me try to answer the first question, which is, yes, we can do a much better job of recovering used aluminum, recycling used aluminum by at least one estimate. We can displace roughly 15% of primary aluminum production by better recycling. There are different ways of doing that. We often rely on state laws to incentivize and encourage recycling, particularly of cans. I will say that alone will not be enough to meet our aluminum demand. I think that's important to note. We're still going to need more primary, but we can certainly do a better job on recycling and on making sure we have increased supplies for secondary aluminum production. I honestly can't answer the second part of that question on resources for solid waste management. Any of my colleagues want to field that one? Yeah, Lauren, I think you've stumped us. But it's gonna make me actually want to dig into this and figure out if there's an answer to your question. So appreciate you posing it. All
Jason,
right.
if I can,
Yeah.
to address the first question there, yeah, we cannot recycle our way out of this problem. Aluminum recycling is vital to the growth of the industry. If you're looking at the investments, you're looking at job growth, you're looking at demand, yes, secondary is in a very strong position. I think which kind of emphasizes our challenge here, that primary is in decline. And we need to ensure that we can increase the production of primary in order to feed the secondary market. It has been noted here to ensure that the primary production is in the US or with allies. Otherwise, we're just importing our way to recycling our way toward the volumes that just cannot be met. We mentioned earlier the demand at 5 to 6 million metric tons. Recycling won't get us there. Key part to the growth, but no, we got to have a primary solution.
Thank you, Joe. Questions just because I'm intrigued by the answers. So Katrina, let me ask you this. You talked a little bit about the global arrangement for sustainable steel and aluminum. I want to compliment you for not using the acronym, which I particularly dislike, GASA. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about some of the recent bumps in the road that we've seen in some of the negotiations between the EU and the US.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. So first negotiation of its kind, the US and the EU established a very ambitious 2-year timeframe to negotiate the first ever commodity agreement that accounted for the carbon emissions associated with traded product. Yowza. They did not meet the 2-year deadline. They're working to resolve negotiations by January 1. There are 2 elements to the agreement. The first element is to cooperate with the European Union to figure out a trade tool that will help reduce the carbon intensity of traded product. On the European Union side, they have the carbon border adjustment mechanism. The sort of data exchange portion of that went into effect, as I said, in October. The US does not have on the books an alternative like that allows us to collect the carbon intensity information associated with what we are presently importing for aluminum. And so one of the key hurdles that we have to clear is to get more exposure to figuring out how to measure and report in a rigorous way the carbon intensity associated with traded product. That is an issue that they've progressed, I think, pretty far. They've identified the data collection tools that they want to use to figure out how to build those instruments, but defining those instruments is something that's, it seems to be on pause until we've got more clarity on this data side. How can we assess a trade tool based on the carbon intensity of the product if we don't know the carbon intensity of the product? So that's step 1. More intriguing is that there's been a terrific amount of progress made on that second element, addressing non-market excess capacity. The United States including that in the global arrangement, because we see that non-market excess capacity in both steel and aluminum has shifted a tremendous amount of primary manufacturing into China or into other South Asian countries owned in part by Chinese state-owned enterprises. It is a huge impact on trade dynamics, on prices that you can fetch on a global market, and on increasing the emissions associated with metals manufactured. It's been a little bit difficult to get the Europeans to agree to prioritize non-market excess capacity as an element of this trade tool, but we have cleared the first hurdle. They are willing to concede on a 10% and 25% tariff schedule for sourced material from non-market excess capacity companies. Of sort of hot debate at present is how what percentage of imports will be covered. So the Europeans don't want to cover 100% of non-market excess capacity imports with this tariff rate. They want a lower figure. And so now the US and the EU are getting down to brass tacks on how much of imports needs to be covered by this non-market excess capacity provision. So plenty of bumps in the road because this is really hard to do. We have no templates for it, but exciting progress, and we'll know more by the first of the year.
Thanks, Katrina. That was a great summary. I'm gonna turn to another question from the audience from Dharma. Tara, this one's for you. Can you speak more to what prioritizing quote the greatest benefits for the greatest number of communities means? What metrics may have been outlined in the application process to achieve this? Also, is this a unique feature of the OSED Industrial Demonstration Program, or IRA bill-funded programs at large? And I'm gonna assume that is this a unique feature is referring to community benefit plans, but you can interpret that question as you will.
Thank you for the question. So community benefit plans are not unique to the IDP program. They are required of all bill and IRA funded funding opportunities and applications. However, the specific language about the greatest benefit for the greatest number of people comes from section 50161 of IRA, and that specific language is for our program only. Some of the things that we've outlined in the FOA are that applicants must describe the type and magnitude of the benefits that will flow to those within the area in which the eligible facility or facilities are located. The section needs to include an assessment of benefits, a description of plans to measure, track, and report benefits, and a strategy to ensure that these anticipated benefits are achieved and delivered. It also includes an assessment of potential negative impacts that the project could have and ways to minimize and mitigate them. They also have to address how their plans will be transparent and accountable to surrounding communities. So all of those things are part of our technical review criteria that is used in the application review period. I think I addressed everything in that question, so thank you.
Thanks, Tara. I will editorialize and say we're big fans of the community benefit plan model. We think it's also very consistent with the legislative intent between the Inflation Reduction Act, which is making a bit of an implicit deal, right? We're gonna invest taxpayer dollars in strategic industry sectors that are of importance to our country, not to mention the fate of the planet. But we're gonna look for opportunities to maximize the public benefits for workers and for communities and for the environment of those investments. And I think the community benefit plan is really the mechanism for companies and other applicants to demonstrate how they're going to do that. So. All right, I've got a question from Joseph Bennett. What policies or actions can local union chapters and members advocate or take to push for domestic aluminum expansion? Ashley, I'm not going to put you on the spot just because you're the union rep here, but anyone I think can answer this question, or everyone can answer. Any takers? I would say, particularly for steelworker chapters, join the Steelworkers Rapid Response Network, which is one of the more effective grassroots action networks in the labor movement that I'm aware of that works in response to federal legislation. That would be my recommendation.
Yes, and get involved with your union. Work hard to create a good product. I mean, we do use a lot of our scrap materials and stuff get sent back to us. And if we can keep our product here, then it just secures jobs for future generations. But definitely go the union route.
Thanks, Ashley. And thanks for the question, Joseph. I have another question here from Fatima. Tara, I think I'm going to throw this one at you. What is being done to ensure that environmental justice communities, who've traditionally been disproportionately burdened by industrialization and left out of the benefits of the clean energy industry, do not experience further harm from this industry?
Thank you. While I'm not an expert in community benefits. That is one of the things that I think the greatest benefit for the greatest good language is trying to get at. And it's one of the things that our program has been focusing on, making sure that we evaluate not only the benefits to the surrounding communities, but also the potential harm. So there is specific language in the FOA trying to talk about, encourage applicants to talk about kind of their dirty laundry and how they're going to improve upon it, if that makes sense. And I don't know if I actually said the name of our FOA in my presentation. It's a mouthful, the Industrial Decarbonization and Emissions Reduction Demonstration to Deployment Funding Opportunity Announcement. And that can be found at OSED Exchange if you want to look at the whole thing and see some more about how we try to address those issues.
Let me add a little.
Oh no, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Eddie.
When if you're done, you can finish, but I had a thought to add after you.
I'm finished.
Okay. I would just say, Fatima, this is the question. Like, as we are pulling together this sustainable aluminum network and working to revitalize and decarbonize the domestic primary industry, I mean, this is a question that I think about every day when I wake up and every night before I go to bed. And it's a hard one. It's not easy to rattle off an answer. I think I can just say what we're attempting to do with the Sustainable Aluminum Network is build relationships with people and organizations who live near primary aluminum facilities so that we are working with and alongside those people and organizations in our work to decarbonize the industry. And this is also where sort of that broad network of like labor, national security, and enviro organizations come into play. What we're not trying to do is shut down facilities. What we are trying to do is reimagine what primary aluminum production can look like in this country so that it's much cleaner, so that it supports people and communities and provides good jobs and functions as a much better neighbor than they have historically. It's not a small task and we're doing our best, but this is the question that we're thinking about. So thank you.
Annie covered a bunch of what I was going to say. I would only add to that we can also, I think, because part of your question was how can local community members benefit from a revitalized aluminum industry, and we can be a lot more intentional about local hire and workforce investment strategies that bring folks from local communities into these jobs as we expand American aluminum production. And in fact, the community benefit plan portion of the DOE funding opportunity announcement, part of that is workforce investment and asking applicants to be very specific about the kinds of strategies they're going to deploy to find and train up local community members so they can benefit from cleaner or expanded aluminum production in a local community. Okay, I'm going to go back here to questions. From Chris Clamp, are there issues with securing the raw materials? Do we rely on imports? Joe, do you want to field that one?
Yeah, I would be happy to. Thank you. Good question. Yeah, if you look at the feedstock to primary aluminum production, it starts with bauxite. You extract bauxite out of the ground. You add oxygen to it to make alumina, and then the smelting process, adding electricity, is how you make aluminum. Yes, we import bauxite. There is one alumina refinery left in the United States in Louisiana. But if you look at from where we're getting it from, Australia and Brazil, from the bauxite, some alumina. Jamaica has bauxite and alumina. So from a security standpoint, we're securing from allies. But yes, we no longer extract bauxite in the U.S. With only one refinery left, we are at a single risk of a single point failure. So there are some slight concerns there. But the production of aluminum, less than 1 million. So yeah, we are importing finished aluminum ingots into the U.S.
Joe, I'm gonna send the next question to you as well. But others can answer. Besides the DOE funds available, and this is from Emil Ramirez. I understand that the Department of Defense is also investing in the aluminum industry, especially in the pure alloy area, to keep that domestically produced. Any comments on that?
Certainly, yes. Arconic, a secondary producer, received a $45 million grant from DoD to invest in high purity aluminum production. High purity is rather unique. There's only one primary smelter that makes it in the U.S. I think, Jason, you mentioned in your opening remarks, that was curtailed last year because of an energy problem. And so secondary producer Arconic has the ability to make it. And I think this grant will go a long way to expediting their actual production for it.
And while you're on the topic, Joe, I'm just going to ask you to say a little bit more about the Defense Production Act authority that was utilized in this case by the Department of Defense, and if you feel like it, how an agency, for example, like the Department of Energy, could deploy the Defense Production Act to get at the cost of electricity problem that you mentioned.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's the Defense Production Act, to oversimplify it, was designed to support industry for critical needs. And aluminum has been determined critical by nearly every list: DOE, Interior, USGS. The list goes on. Of all the government agencies, aluminum is listed as critical. And so there is an opportunity there for DPA, either through DoD or DOE, to address the cost and availability of electricity. Again, the fundamental problem, the fundamental challenge for domestic production is access and affordability of electricity. And so trade is vitally important, labor is vitally important, clean production is vitally important. But if we had to narrow it down to one thing, it'd be the access to clean energy. Clean energy is very expensive. And if you look at the challenges the primary producers are facing, it's a financial challenge. How can there are two basic numbers when it comes to aluminum production: the price of electricity coming in and the price of the metal in the market going out. Can't really do much about the price in the market. So it's all about the focus on the cost of energy. And it's expensive and it's volatile. And that's why we've been at this for however many years. So if DoD, again, a gross over exaggeration here, the DoD DPA program is designed to address these things. We at SAFE are studying this further to determine what exactly are the specifics here and how can we address this for them. Other than the Arconic award earlier this year, I don't believe DPA has been used for aluminum since the 60s. And of course, we believe there is an opportunity here to do this. And that's just through DoD. I think Jason knows better than I do. IRA would allow DOE to deploy DPA funding to address some of the larger needs of domestic and clean production. So we are exploring avenues on that path as well. But a long way of saying, generically, the DPA was designed to do this. We at SAFE are trying to find out how do we break through to get the actual support.
Thanks, Joe. Let me ask a question, a broad question. Joe, you answered this partially, but let me open this up to the field. What would be the best case scenarios on the policy and legislative side of things in order to revitalize aluminum nationally? Anyone want to speak further on that? Joe's answer on DPA was part of the answer, but open to other parts of that answer as well.
So I just want to reiterate the role of trade as a really important element here. Yes, cost pressures on producers related to how expensive energy is in the United States relative to other manufacturing markets is a big concern. But trade tools are an indispensable part of this equation. It is a sort of general policy in China that if you want to locate a manufacturing facility there, they're willing to take two sources of costs off your books. The first is building your facility. They'll do that for you. That gives them a chance to locate the facility where they want to and to steal your IP. Number two, energy costs. China is reputable for not passing along energy costs to manufacturers that operate. And so as a consequence, the price pressure is taken off the books for manufacturers in China. And the best way we have to correct that pressure and how it manifests in the domestic consumer market is by introducing trade instruments that will allow us to ensure that we are valuing cleaner production better. And by introducing policies like the global arrangement, like a carbon border adjustment mechanism, we'll ensure that we are insulating cleaner, better manufacturers from this unfair competition, especially from countries that take major costs off the books and make it just impossible to make the kind of investments necessary to decarbonize and build up primary aluminum production here.
I just want to echo that. That cannot be overstated. If you look at a global playing field and your competition doesn't have to pay 40% of the costs. It's very difficult to compete, to say the very least. But Jason, to your question earlier, what else could be done here? I think there's an interesting issue before Treasury right now on the guidance for the 45X manufacturing tax credit. The way the aluminum production was defined in the legislation was incorrect. It's a three-part process, as I mentioned: bauxite, alumina, aluminum. The way it was written, it favors alumina. My understanding, the intent was to ensure that the legislation was benefiting the national security and high purity ends of the market. The phrase, we don't want to support beer can manufacturing. So conceptually, you get that, but unfortunately, the text favors steps 2, not step 3 of the process. This is before Treasury. Our understanding is they will issue guidance at the end of the year. Our hope is that they can fix this, not only for the intent of the legislation, but also for the output for producers. If this is not corrected, the one alumina producer I mentioned will benefit. The 6 aluminum producers will not. And so getting 45X right will make a big step forward when it comes to cash flow and keeping the smelters operational.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Katrina. I would add, hopping out of my facilitator role here for a moment, I'd underline some of the numbers that Tara showed. The $5.8 billion Advanced Industrial Facilities Program, that's a lot of money. $5.8 billion is a lot of money, but not really. I mean, the energy intensive industrial sector in this country is enormous. And as I think the response to this FOA showed, there is enormous pent up demand from the private sector to cost share the expense of deploying advanced technologies to decarbonize their particular production processes. And Tara showed some of the numbers for aluminum itself. There's more in requests than they have the money to provide. So all to say that at some point soon, we will need Congress to reauthorize that program and appropriate more funding and look for other ways of providing resources to in particular, the energy intensive manufacturing sectors. I want to highlight an answer to Lauren's question from my colleague Harley. Looks like EPA has a $275 million bipartisan infrastructure law program for the solid waste infrastructure for recycling grant program. So you'll see a link there at the EPA site. Harley, thank you for jumping on that in real time. Okay, let me ask if there are any other questions from the audience. There is a question here. We've already talked a little bit about secondary aluminum production. Question from Daniel with another question in that vein. Secondary aluminum production is a concern looking ahead. Any further comments on how that will look 10 to 20 years down the road? Joe or anyone else, I don't know if you want to look ahead to that. I'll flag something Joe said earlier, which is 10 to 20 years down the road, we're going to need more aluminum and we're going to need more primary. But anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to say our focus on the primary side, but recognizing the role of the secondary in 10 years is going to continue to grow. It wasn't that long ago that you had a split within the industry that was 70-30 primary to secondary. Now that has clearly changed in the last 10 years, as we've said over and over, the decline of primary and the rise of secondary. So in 10 years, secondary is only going to continue to grow and will take a larger share of the market. Again, it will not replace primary. There's no 100 to 0 secondary primary scenario. But if it's 60-40 now, give or take, 10 years, you can see it being 70-30. So secondary production is going to continue. You've seen secondary investments in secondary facilities for the first time in 40 years. 3 were built this year or last. So in recent history, you're seeing investments there. So I hear you on the question. The secondary is going to be fine. I think our point here today is let's not overlook primary.
Let me invite any further questions, and let me also invite my colleagues to throw out other points or other answers to any of the questions that have already been posed.
Jason, to your point about the numbers, yeah, the $6 billion OSED program, $50 billion for clean manufacturing, but across 7 industries. And so it gets pretty thin pretty quickly. An enormous amount of money, an enormous amount of demand for these programs, but it does thin out pretty quickly. And so if there's a way for DOE to prioritize, I'm not sure how they're looking at all of them equally, if they are. But from our standpoint, trying to revive primary aluminum here, getting DOE to prioritize or favor or give equal share to aluminum versus the other industries, steel, glass, cement, that too could go a long way.
Yeah.
But tremendous investments are great starts. They are not the answer.
I will just mention for everyone's awareness that in addition to the OSED program we talked about here, there is also the expanded 48C tax credit, which upon being reauthorized in the Inflation Reduction Act, also included eligibility for industrial decarbonization projects. So folks should be well aware of that. Joe mentioned 45X, the production tax credit. I noted some things need to be clarified there, but that is also another good source from the Inflation Reduction Act. But again, won't be enough. Any final questions from the audience? All right. Annie, do you want to say anything here at the end before we close out?
Oh, just that I just have loved this. This has been a delight. I'm so glad that Jasmine did a great job pulling us all together. What a great program. Thanks, everyone.
And let me join in saying thanks to all of our panelists in the audience and on all the good questions. Look forward to working with everyone moving forward. Thanks all.